showing, for example, as we had just the other day in our lecture series, Triumph of the Web, which really helps you a little bit to reflect on the dominant zeitgeist which made a movement like National Socialism possible. And that I think we can do with a little bit of imagination. We can use tools which will approximate. I say approximately because it's not complicated. All right. So, as I said, the most useful thing, and I'm talking to students as I have this semester and asked them what they consider the most important in the lecture series, what really has touched the most, which has had the most meaning to them. And invariably, and I say invariably, number one, it's panels of survivors, rescuers, liberators, whatever. And that is the most important, apparently, that really touches them, because they really are confronted, faced with people who usually are exceedingly vocal. And we have some people here at the Lions Forum Club, who have made a tremendous contribution in bringing that alive, what they have gone through, so that the younger generation, new generation, can relate to that and integrate it. And that I think is exceedingly important. There is no substitute for that. And therefore, also, it's one of the reasons why we are trying to videotape these things, simply because we know that none of us will be around in 10, 20, 30, 40 years, or whatever, not 40 years, just fun, not fun. All right. So, what else can we use? Well, we can use accounts, and that's why I feel that anyone who has had profound experiences should write accounts, which then are available. And I'm in the process of writing not only a fragment, which is about 1/3 of what I intend to write, and that is available then, and it's one of the texts which we use every time when we teach the lecture series, because I've had tremendous response, and obviously not because I've written it or because it's my baby or whatever, but simply because it has meaning to these people. They get something out of it, and I'm very happy that this is something which we can offer to them. Then we have handouts, graphs, documentary texts, and accounts. And then we have to be very careful what we select, understanding, as it has been said before, who is the audience. We have to give the students the opportunity to ask unasked questions, clarifications of complexities, and not at all times do we do that, simply because of time limitations, lack of knowledge, or running out of answers indeed, which is a possibility. So that is always important, that we somehow follow up after lectures, after what we have presented to the students, so that they have a chance to enter into a dialogue with us. And we have not been very successful in that somehow, because it has been always cut short. And we have to check, that is the lesson which we have learned, and we all working with that, Sylvia and others, and all, I think we're all in agreement. Are the major perspectives which we offer to the students shedding sufficient light on a better understanding of survivors, perpetrators, the nature of this ideology, and then also the role of an ideology, a belief system, a myth system. About a police state or a dictatorship. They've never experienced it, and it's very important for us to relate that to them. And what it means to live in deprivation, which then will give rise to some sort of simplistic, absolutist ideologies, and to which people will jump on the bandwagon and then support force to that particular movement. And that is something which we see today again in Germany. And I think that's a very important record recognition that why has this rise 14% of so-called Republicans, who are, for all practice, very close to being neo-Nazis, exceedingly important that they are actively involved in politics simply because they've got 14%. And that is something which we need to understand in prevailing socio-economic and political conditions in time and space, which will stimulate these sort of prejudices, the biases, and all the racist notions in any given country which experiences such conditions. So another thing which I think is exceedingly important are the dwelling on descriptive rather than interpretative aspects. We are very good in describing the horrors, but we are not that good in interpreting the horrors, so that we better kind of understand them. Are these indeed descriptive and interpretative aspects of the Holocaust covered equally? And it's my view that they need to be covered equally, not just dwell on the horrors. Certainly we can start with that, with the descriptive, but then we have to follow up with the interpretative. Most of the Holocaust literature is primarily descriptive. And then we have to ask a question which I consider to be important: what are the rewards in the Holocaust or genocide? Well, and as I mentioned earlier, how very great, as a matter of fact, are dismal. Because instead of being rewarded for it, the very chance is that we will be punished instead. You know, that we will be shunned, that we will be isolated socially and otherwise, academically. And as I said before, you know, that I think it's a nice way to put it. We are going to be shunned as bearers of good news, of bad news rather than good news. And then, of course, it's the burnout thing. How can one teach such a subject and not be adversely affected? And I can see that with myself. I've been doing it for a long time. You know, I can say, my God, you know, I mean, something is happening to me. What is it? And how can I prevent it? What can I do about it? In order to not become insensitive, callous, whatever, and not be moved in it anymore, because it has become a routine. You see, so there are very many things which we need to consider, which are side effects, sort of side effects, teaching the Holocaust. Now, and another thing is which we need to do with the students: how can the knowledge, as we mentioned before by a number of the speakers, how can the knowledge of human destructiveness be applied in everyday life? It will not have to obtain a job, possibly perhaps with the UN, but it's not going to help any student who is taking a Holocaust class to land in a job, let's face it. Many people here are exceedingly realistic in these things, and they take classes and courses not to further necessarily their knowledge and insight, but in order to land in a job, since we are living in a very materialistic society. And that is the outcome, one of the outcomes of that. All right, so the third part, which I wanted to briefly discuss and see how you respond to it, what kind of students are attracted to Holocaust studies? And in more recent times, what are the reasons for the interest? Some take lecture series because they can't get into any other class, particularly during the last 2-3 years, and earn X amount of units, in our case 2 units. Others get into it because they are genuinely interested, and some because of unresolved problems, I like to call it unresolved problems in living, because they more readily identify who think and feel that they are survivors of sorts. And that is a very important thing, because very frequently I found that people are abused children. And these abused children came up, it was very interesting, and Carol and I discussed them on numerous occasions, that very many of the students who come to us are really abused, very highly neurotic individuals who are attracted to this subject because they can relate to, identify them because they feel they are also survivors of sorts. Now, I've already talked previously about the response of colleagues, which I think is very devastating, really has been. And viewed as to be oddity and someone to be avoided. And then at times, and I've seen that also among us, particularly those who are more intimately involved with the teaching the Holocaust, that there was some sort of a paranoia, you know, towards each other. So talk about he's talking, he means well, he just doesn't mean well, and he's going to do something. And we all just talk, we gossip, or this and that, our God is after me, you know. And that is something which is a side effect. So we are suspicious of each other. And for reasons which may be or may not be justified, usually or may not justified. But we are very suspicious of each other and treat each other accordingly. All right, now then, I'm just simply touching this very superficially, but I think it's something which ought to be mentioned, and we can talk about it later this afternoon. Another problem is funding opportunities are very limited. Not many people will be prepared to donate money for Holocaust, which most likely will enhance their status or prestige. A subject which may be more likely to be avoided than supported. And there are some people who have vested interest and may do that, but for all practical terms, it's very difficult to get any sort of funding for Holocaust-related studies. It's exceedingly difficult. Oh, well, therefore, because it's difficult, you know, it's usually taught by people of their height. In other words, they don't get anything for their toils. In other words, they're rewarded either by money or anything else. And many of us have exactly done that. We are taught that in addition to our normal teaching work. And that you can do for a while, but after some few years, it will wear thin, and people will no longer be prepared to do that. And we have tremendous problems because people no longer interact with students sufficiently, or they spend enough time to really do a more professional job. And very few, select few people continue to do that, but they also become somewhat wary in doing something for nothing and not getting any recognition to it. So we are not just talking about material rewards, but also just psycho-emotional or moral recognition. All right, now let me talk about the last thing, and then I'm finished, the methods. So what are the methods, the best methods to teach the Holocaust we have found, and we are also be discussing the questionnaire which we hand out every semester after the end of the lecture series, which has been exceedingly helpful to give us insight into the response of the students and see how we can improve the teaching of the Holocaust. And that has been an exceedingly important tool which I can recommend to anyone who is to teach a larger number of students. So as we said before, one of the most successful methods will be in the future, we can anticipate, is eyewitness accounts, survivors, liberators, the rescuers, perpetrators, and so forth. Accounts, oral history in general, oral history, and there are some things which will be used in the future, the chances are, when people will have died who actually witnessed themselves, eyewitnesses themselves. So that's what oral history is doing. It is taping interviews, which have also a very beneficial psycho-emotional effect on those who are being interviewed, because very frequently, for the first time, they are able to open up and talk about their experiences, which and I also would say that, just in passing, that when I interviewed former members of the SS, some people broke down and started to cry, and I have some people with whom I developed some human relationships. So wherever I am invited to their place and stay also quite frequently overnight and a few days and all that, when I leave, they embrace me and break into tears and say, I'm so glad that I have a chance to talk to you, that you are listening to me and you are supportive of me. And that really has done something really emotional in others. And of course I never would have believed that whole, consultation came so afterwards, and I never would have believed that this would take place. That something was totally unanticipated. All right. Then I'd like to say one problem we have here, and again, as has been said before, we are talking about Sonoma State. It is, as far as I'm concerned, difficult to stimulate a meaningful dialogue between students and instructor. Mainly because students come with minimal or no background to classes. Many are, of course, very ignorant of history. And therefore they just have so many gaps which have not been filled, so that it is difficult for them to relate to the subject matter. And so something has to be done in order to have prerequisites. So let me say again, in terms of, in order to be a relatively good instructor, it's certainly no guarantee. I think it's absolutely required and should be important for people to conduct research, writing, and similar endeavors which will improve their scholarship and their knowledge, so that they will be better home to respond to the requirements of students. I've been told that I have to conclude my very short presentation, and thank you for your attention.
The course outlines that are offered on file for us to look like. I assume that they're the Title V's, where they're really clear with objectives and content. That would be very helpful to me. Two questions, one content and one process. For content, I think it was Professor Beard who mentioned that a lot in the German course, there's a lot of opportunity to German bash. Also in the Holocaust, there's a lot of opportunity to Jewish bash. And I don't have a full answer. I'd like to hear your response to the question of passivity, sheep, why did it take rescuers, the Warsaw Ghetto is small in scope. To see how you would respond to that question, police state, however you would respond. And the process question is, in San Francisco City College, to get a course outline passed, it has to go through a curriculum committee. It has to be seen as having a need. It has to be seen as being approved by an advisory board of something. Question one, did you in-service people or schools as to the need for Holocaust? Did you come against their preconceptions of memorializing something that's past? How did you deal with it? Did you get support? And are the courses that you offer interdisciplinary in nature? High school is a little different because you can interdisciplinary on your own, but at the college level, are the courses that you offer interdisciplinary?
Let me try to respond to the first question about Jew bashing. And you bring up what I think is a very problematical aspect of Holocaust studies, namely the extent of the Jews' own responsibility for what happened to them, which is a question that gets discussed a good deal in Germany these days, and certainly is the kind that students here too are prone to bringing up. What I would answer to the way you phrased the question, specifically focusing on the Warsaw Ghetto, was that the Jews were not lambs to the slaughter. That the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto were amazingly well organized to try to resist what was going wrong. Ultimately, they were annihilated nonetheless because they lacked the firepower. But what this points out is that before prejudging any particular individual that was connected with the Holocaust. It's important to do one's homework and to learn what the facts were about things. Now, on the other side of the issue, I think that, and this is the problematic aspect of it, I know for a lot of Jews, and that is that there was an extent to which many Jewish leaders, in one way or another, complied with the directives of the Nazis, thinking that they were doing the best thing that they could for the people that were under their care. And personally, I think it's foolish to point to people like that and say, well, you see, they brought it on themselves. They obviously did not bring it on themselves, and they were in a terrible dilemma as to how they should act under circumstances of extreme duress. And some of them chose to do things which ultimately looked as though they were just acquiescing in their slaughter, when indeed what they may well have been doing was trying to buy time or do the thing that made the most sense to them at that point. So there's even less justification for Jew bashing, as far as I'm concerned, than there is for German bashing. But any kind of is silly, because what it does is paints every member of a group with the same broad brush, and thereby robs them of their essential humanity. And it's robbing people of their humanity, which makes it possible for us to then proceed to annihilate them or exterminate them, or
Following what Phil has said, and really quick on its heels, one of the things that's involved in the question that you posed is the definition of response. I was in Warsaw 2 summers ago, and I saw and had a chance to meet with people who are working with the collection known as Oneg Shabbat. Oneg Shabbat was the name of the archivists group run by one Emanuel Ringelblum in the Warsaw Ghetto. Response on the part of the victims of a military juggernaut that was what ran over 20 countries, and yet that was still in place. So I think the question should be when people could resist, the strength to do so, and isn't it remarkable the extent to which they did resist? Which is a sort of different point.
I just getting in a second. I just have some just very short things to say. That most of the resistors who were not functionaries in the resistance survivors, who survived the Holocaust without hurting anyone else in a way which saved their lives, are resistors. Because you can't be a survivor without not having been a resistor. That's, I think, one generalization which I think holds true. And then, in broader terms, I'd like to say also one thing which relates to some arguments, is that the Holocaust is a Jewish monumental tragedy, but a non-Jewish problem. And I think that's some sort of a insight which I think one can pretty much distill once you really have reflected on some of the things. And the tremendous, we done things in concentration camps, and I could write, another account which I will anyway, in terms of actual resistance, which was not passive resistance, just to survive, but very active resistance, and it was in places like Auschwitz-Birkenau. And I was a member of a Maccabi group, which was led by a Maccabi leader, a man called Freddie Hirsch. And this person organized already in Theresienstadt and then later in Auschwitz-Birkenau, young people like myself, early teenagers and what have you, to prepare for a very specific opposition. And we met in one barrack where we developed strategies and what have you. So all these things were done, and nothing we didn't come to fruition. But that was really something which we prepared for. We didn't come to it. Why? Because Freddie Hirsch, along with all the other people who were, with the exception of me, because I came to Auschwitz during a different time and a different number. So all the people with a certain number on their arm here, tattooed on their arm, were sent to the gas chamber. And Freddie Hirsch, who was the leader, instead of being gassed by the Nazis, letting himself be gassed by the Nazis, he committed suicide. To protest, is that he had to die, but he's not going to be killed by the Nazis. He was an exceedingly athletic person. He was a gym teacher. That was his profession. And he happened to be also slightly homosexual. And so he formed groups to resist. And he was one of the people who was mostly admired by the SS because he did not approximate the Jewish stereotype, namely being athletic, outgoing, and not scraping in the Nazis. So they highly respect him, except they came in order that all the people with a certain number, dark transport, for no obvious reason, was gassed. And he was one of them, along with most of my friends. Closest friends of mine were gassed at that particular time. That was in 1943.
I just want to make three very, very brief observations. That's the most important one. Namely, first, in terms of bashing business. Yes, it's very important that we do not bash, because if you simply bash whole nations, when I introduced my course on the Holocaust, I do not blame the German people per se. It gets us no place. Because when you start bashing and blaming, there's no room for analysis, causal analysis. What we engage in is in blame analysis. Having said that, on the other hand, and so therefore also very quickly that at best maybe 10% of the German people were Nazis. The rest were not Nazis. Now they were bystanders of another issue in systematic way. But having said that, I also want to be sure that we do not whitewash and be apologists for Germany. And that's very important too, and I know none of us are doing this. I know that, but it's important to realize that because there are renowned German historians who are generalizing, and so they're asking the question of, well, yes, you did a terrible thing, but wait a minute, were the Jews at fault to some extent? Maybe they resisted Nazis, maybe something else, maybe they control the banks, but obviously that's a falsehood because they do not control banks, but it's subject to historical verification if you have some doubts about what I'm saying. To you, so there's a danger of that, and all I'm saying is let's watch out that we have this new kind of situation. And isn't Israel committing the Holocaust on the Palestinians too now? So why do you pick on us German people? I say we're not picking on anybody. And let's try to be factual as best as human beings can. Second point, in terms of rescue and resistance, I wanted to say in part, I'm trying to give you a commercial here, namely that yes, there was resistance, and then I resent people like Hilbert and Hannah Arendt and others who are about the Jewish Holocaust and the sheep syndrome and people don't know baloney. They don't know from nothing. The archive pushers. Okay, I shouldn't have said that. Obviously, we don't want scholars. But they don't really. So why don't they also talk about the brave mother or daughter who would not leave her aging mother to die, stay with her? How about the child, father or mother who comforted their child as was being executed? How about courage of his children? That is not bravery, that's heroism, as far as I'm concerned. What about the partisans? What about 37 ghettos rebelled? What about some rebellion concentration camps, which you gentlemen know about, particularly? In addition to this, and here's the commercial, we feel that it is what is left out from the history of World War II is also Jewish heroism. One finding in the axis here, there are people, there are hundreds of Jewish rescuers. And I don't mean partisans, I don't mean people who are blowing up a gas chamber and so forth. I'm talking about who are rescuers. That's the part of the material that needs to be gathered here. So trying to do something about this. Obviously, the rest studying what the profile one particular hero Jewish rescuer. Last point, and that's perhaps the most important one to say, is that I think that having received so little time, all of us, I think that speaking only for my shouldn't be presumptuous to speak for the other three speakers, that we should allow the audience to participate, the audience to raise questions, the audience to take up the next 15 minutes, so that we have. If that's okay, that's all. I'm speaking for myself only.
I would like to answer one question that she asked about the interdepartmental participation that nobody answered. Here at Sonoma State, 12 departments, 12 faculties are participating. It's an interdisciplinary.
In the lectures, there are 12 different
Right.
departments. So each
Planning
department would give
planning
a lecture, planning. And how about funding and curriculum committees and educating faculty and things like that?
I don't want to get into too much detail about it because I'm not sure how applicable it is to other situations. But the good news is, and John, I'm not sure how aware you are of this yet, but there are currently efforts going on with the Dean of Academic Planning and the Academic Vice President. Take both the Holocaust lecture series and the very similar, somewhat overlapping War and Peace lecture series, which goes on in the fall. And as of next fall, turn them into upper division general education applicable courses with funding right off the top, which will allow us to do all kinds of things that we found very difficult to do. We call it an interdisciplinary course, but the problem has been, as John said, that most of the faculty who are participating are not getting paid for that, and you can only expect that kind of a volunteer effort to go on for so long and have other things that they have to devote themselves to. But if we get money, when I say right off the top, I mean the Vice President is going to set money aside to pay teachers' salaries for teaching sections of the Holocaust and the War and Peace lecture series before distributing the money to the academic schools. This, I can't guarantee that this is
speaking for the last 15 years in various schools, high schools, junior highs, colleges and universities, and even churches. I have usually accompanied her and I've often participated in the discussion after her presentation because I was born in Germany and fled from Nazi Germany and here. And then was, as a soldier in World War II, went back to Germany as an American soldier. So I can testify to what preceded the Holocaust. Now, Gloria approaches the topic not with a sense of retribution or a sense of commemoration, but with a sense of combating racism. And this particularly is appealing to high school students who are formative in development, because it's something they can apply in their own lives. To respect other people, to have compassion for other people, regardless of who they are. So it has direct bearing on their lives. Now, we have been fortunate to get some direct feedback of what the effect of this affective learning is. And the way I like to think about it is a student really has to have grounding in the cognitive aspects of study, has to have some knowledge of facts and figures, but then is Elvira coming and telling of her own experiences is the affective part of it. It puts an emotional gloss on the historical picture. Now, the response we've had from students is evidenced in thousands of letters that Gloria has from high school, college, junior high school students. And we were amazed at what effect it has had on them emotionally. Of course, they begin to understand the Holocaust. They are aghast at what has happened. They vow to forget it. But over and above that, they start thinking, they start putting themselves into her shoes. Start thinking, now, what would I have done had I been in that situation? Would I have had the courage even to continue living until the next day? Quite stood at all. Then they start thinking about their own situation, and they start appreciating their own lives, what they have, their possessions, their school, their ability to be in a free country, to study, their families. They learn to appreciate this as sweet brothers and sisters, because parents who don't understand, and so forth. And in a way, they become more appreciative of what democracy means. And over and above that, sometimes Gloria has been asked to speak in schools that have very acknowledged racial problems between different racial groups, for the purpose of trying to relieve problems. And judging from the letters that you get, it must have had some effect, maybe only temporary, but some effect, changing some students' way of thinking. So these are much more far-reaching effects than simply something focused on the Holocaust. And that was a very interesting result of the experience. Just said to us after Gloria's presentation, you know, having listened to you, I realized that my own life is not as screwed up as I thought it was. I also wanted to ask you about something else. Today, this slick, very nicely done brochure fell into my hands. And it advertises several books. One called Flashpoint, of Ingrid Becker, about Kristallnacht. One called Barnes Against the Blackout. One called The Holocaust on Trial, Case of Ernst Zindel. One, the Hoaxo Project report. Another one, The Dissolution of Eastern European Jewry. Then about the philosophy of Alfred Rosenberg. And a book by Congressman Jerry Orr. Another book from Rothschild to Rockefeller, The World Conspiracy. And the last one, a book by Adolf Hitler, The Unknown Artist. Now, do we need to do something about it? If so, what? Specific.
Could I say just a word quickly? One word only. That obviously we get tons of this stuff. I get it in the mail. And I wrote away to hate groups, I got 73 of those, etc. So that exists around. The only thing that I can do is try to expose about this and send it to the ADL. Even on the field that Humboldt State is also getting this copy. By the way, the libraries are collecting this stuff too. In the name of freedom to collect everything.
How are you getting it? How do you come across it?
It's sent to me, it's distributed, for instance, a horrible newspaper called the Focus. My dentist has one. So you get this, you have to report and talk to the dentist. Hey, Mr. Dentist, Dr. Dentist, do you know what you're getting here?
But don't you subscribe? Did you send in a subscription to what I said? You get it for free.
I sent a subscription to, get it all for free, by the way. And they kept feeding me this stuff until I stopped. And they asked me for subscription. But later on, I did subscribe to one journal only because I want to receive the garbage that they get in. The journal is starts with review. So they're constantly publishing conferences. A lot of PhDs supposedly are on it. You know all that stuff.
I'm just concerned that all of Gabriel's questions did not get asked, answered probably because there were 6 or 8 of them in a row, I think. And what I'd like to suggest is that you come and talk to Dr. Steiner and myself afterwards. I have many syllabi, guidelines, course guidelines from other campuses and so forth. And then in addition, I might ask those of you who do have some course guidelines to get them to me, and then I can have copies for anybody else who's interested in having them. We are. Yes, we're in the process of collecting just this sort of thing, so that more people who want to do courses can find something have done. So you don't have to invest.
Would they go to the Holocaust Library Education Bureau?
No, you come to the Holocaust Center here on campus, the Rachel Carson. But yes, there's also the Jewish, the
course
Holocaust Center in
outlines
Northern.
that you have, you could also send over there, so there could be a resource in the city as well.
There is the main resource there. Do you know?
I know, but do they have the course outlines? That's what I'm saying.
Send mine down there.
Copy, yeah.
Okay, all right, we can try to do that.
Question.
I want to return, flip my foot down. There's 2 issues that a couple of you brought up. One is, in some sense, the reverse of what Carl just said, is that in 10 years of doing Holocaust education, as first as a high school German teacher and now a teacher educator, these past weeks I spent at a high school in East Oakland, and for the first time received almost the opposite response from students, which was hearing about the Holocaust and gathering some understanding by hearing largely from the African-American males in the classes that their perception of what is happening to their community at genocide. And so their response to my talking about the Holocaust was less, my life is comfortable, but more anger around. I'm a daughter of Holocaust survivors. I've reached the point after 10 or so years of teaching about the Holocaust that my palms don't perspire as much, my heart doesn't beat quite as loudly. But I found that it's neither possible nor necessary really for me to set aside my emotions in doing this, and that what really teaches kids are my my emotionally loaded pauses, that when we're watching a film together for a moment, I may have to put my head in my hands because I can't look at the scenes anymore. Or that when Gloria comes to speak to students, that she might pause in her narration. I think those feelings teach students more than the words do. So that's that question.
Well, you posed one of the toughest questions I've had thrown at me in a long time, so I'll be mercifully brief in my answer because it's such a tough question. First of all, I think you have to acknowledge pain where pain exists. The fact is that there are many people, and many people are in pain, and maybe it's their own kind of pain. That's one thing, as we don't optimization sweepstakes, as the phrase goes in one of the many authoritative books on the history of the Holocaust. We're not in it for my Holocaust is bigger than your Holocaust, or my Holocaust is bigger than your tragedies. I would be more exactly in saying that's not what we're about. On the other hand, I see as my major goal with students or with teachers the building of a vocabulary, the ability to increase level of articulate responses to the history. The fact is that there are many historical hangnails, and there are many human rights violations, and there are some genocides. And every historical event, regardless of its magnitude, deserves its own understandings, its own vocabulary, its own context or framework in which to place it. So I think that that's the way it needs to be handled, that pain has to be acknowledged, but that strict constructions for definitions are crucial. And also the fact that there aren't answers to every question. The fact is that people are evolving toward their own answers. There are some things that are true and some things that aren't. For example, when a young black man may say, we're in the midst of a genocide, how many of our people of my gender are languishing either in jail or dying in drug wars or in other things. The fact is that in the tone of it, there is some measure of truth in the observations. On the other hand, when the idea that the genocide is out there and therefore it's pervasive extends to the idea of Jewish doctors putting AIDS into the black community, which is a fairly common charge made by people in some quarters of the radical portions of the black community, African American community, Afrocentrist community. That's another level. I mean, you have to separate the truths from the myths, even in the midst of pain. And that's a very difficult thing to do. It means that anybody who deals with this history has to become someone of a wide scope. It means you can't stay a chapter ahead in the book and expect to be able to deal with many of the questions that arise. So I don't know if that comes close, but it's as close as I can get in a minute.
I just would like to say how important it is to let the students know that everybody has their own perspective, and how something like the Holocaust could have happened in Germany, historical setting led up to it. I think that is extremely important to recognize it. The framework was in Germany, how German people felt after World War I, and how members of the Nazi Party helped to elevate Hitler into this position, how they built him up to become so godlike. And especially addressing this to our Holocaust lecture series here, I think that needs to be really emphasized, that most students probably are not aware of the circumstances.
as humanity, and that we can build bridges, hopefully, and those are to each other.
I'd like to thank you for sharing that, because other German people have had a hard time expressing their opinions about some of the Holocaust settings, and I hope you continue to share what you feel with us. I do think we need to move to the next section, but one thing that happened today that has upset me a bit, that I feel needs to be addressed, and this is a matter of becoming more sensitive as educators. The girl that said the comment about Adolf Hitler, what happened to him was here today as one of my assistants. And there's no way that I could have warned people not to say something like that. She left, and I'm not sure if she's very hurt that people might have thought she was completely ignorant. She has been very different. She's very interested in this subject, and she doesn't know. And she wants to know, but now she's gone. And so I would just like people to be more sensitive to what they say. It's really easy to be at one level or the other and say things, either be at the faculty level or at the student level, and I'm in between both, so that I sometimes can feel the barbs that come from either direction or the insensitivities that pass from one level to the other. So I think we just need to be more careful about what we say. We don't know what that means.
I'd like to respond because that was my pet bill of my profound apologies. I think actually I saw her later and she didn't seem upset.
Okay, but I feel responsible. Not that I didn't repeat that particular example, but I didn't intersect it at all. I mean, I didn't stop it and say, look, this is not appropriate, because I didn't realize it was going to be used in that setting. But it's just a matter of, it was a perfect example for you, but it's her life and her feelings. So,
I'm sure.
Yeah.
If you get the chance, please convey my apologies.
I'll be in touch with her, because she's in the lecture series, so we'll reach out to her over that. But anyway, yeah, and thank you to the panelists very much. Sam is now going to introduce her.
Do you,
Yes, I guess we should take a break. Okay. 5-minute break, yes, so we can make the change here.
I'd like to introduce a person that is a special person. He is one of those several hundred people that we have interviewed for our study. He's a rescuer. His name is Deepen. Interestingly enough, I have seen him talk. He's goes on wherever he can, various schools, including here, I'm pretty sure. And he's concerned with a very important issue, because he too sees the ultimate goal of teaching about the Holocaust is not to bathe in this bathtub of morbidity, plus the horrible story over and over again. You can read this in a million pages and written about it. But I think he's much more concerned asking the question, why so few people were involved in rescue, why so many bystanders? And his mission in life, the way I see it and I understand it, is to teach the 3 C's: care, compassion, and consideration. As he speaks, that's the moral message of his deliveries when he does speak to various schools, etc. So I want to give him a hand. And now, do I have my notes any place? I guess I don't. How does one introduce a wife? First of all, she is my first wife, and for the last 25 years, 35 years, she's going to be my last wife for the next 40 years. And seriously, she is a friend, scholar, she is my guiding light, she's a senior author, I'm a junior author, and the last 2 books that we've written, one was called Race and the Other, the other one's called Where the Caring Society. And I've read, but I might as well. She's also a scholar, been elected Scholar of the Year at Humboldt State University. And she's going to address us She's going to speak for me since I don't speak so well. And so she's going to be speaking about the topic that she will speak for.
I waited with great interest to hear how Sam would introduce it. It was an inspiration on Jack's part and Carol's part to ask him to do so. It's the first time in our life that he's done that. And so I thought he would tell you how good I was at making scrambled eggs or or something of that sort. So, thank you.
Why don't you move the mic
This way, yeah. I just want to, okay. First, the morning has been very stimulating. My mind has been going at a very great speed. And I would like to suggest, as kind of an introductory comment, that in some measure, there is a unifying theme for me which ultimately perhaps reflects itself in the work that we've done. In each of the people who have spoken today, and that includes people from the floor as well as the people up here, not a single one has stopped with the experience of the Holocaust as being a particularist experience. Each single one has seen its implications far beyond that experience. And I'm very impressed with that because not all people see their own suffering as leading to that, what seems to this group, inevitable progression. And it strikes me, particularly as the comments came through, and I think Jack said so terribly well, that resistance takes many forms, and that maintaining one's humanity is perhaps people immediately think military resistance, and that is one form. And I think it is a credit to the Jewish community, which has spearheaded the study of rescuers, and which, at least for Sam and me, has been the mainstay of financial support and the groups to whom we are disproportionately invited to speak. That in itself to telling comment of great importance because it suggests a thrust on some level of that recognition that inconsistently or in attempting to maintain our humanity and appreciating others' humanity, that ultimately is the lesson. And I don't know how we have that message, both wider among our own among Jewish community as well as others, but it strikes me that that is the ultimate one. Now, I say that because I think on some level, when we started doing this work on rescuers, that was a message that was somehow penetrating, that we were hearing, although perhaps not fully articulating it. And I know as I watched Sam in his own progression, in his own learning experience, having him switch his focus from the atrocity to the altruistic one was an enormous leap, and it's quite a gigantic one to make. And for me, it became very clear that the message of hope is one that we've got to communicate. On that level, when Sam and I worked together on the altruistic person, and I'm not sure how many of you know anything at all about that study. I presume not the whole world does, and I presume not all of you do. So let me just give you a short little a synopsis of it, and then I'd like to do two things. I have here some sheets I'd like to circulate, which are a pack of numbers, which I'd like to help that we interact in analyzing it. This is one of our, on this little sheet of paper is the consequence of thousands of hours worth of work. So I'd like to use that first, and then I'd like to move to the next step after we have some time to talk about it and interact on it, which is the next logical step, which is, of course, how do we take this message that seems to be either tacitly or explicitly implied here, and what is it to institutionalize it in what we call totalitarian society? But another way of looking at it is how do we institutionalize it in the way that Phil proposed this morning. How do we make it part of our lives? How do we make ourselves personally responsible? What do we do in our classrooms? What do we do in our families? What do we do in our schools? What do we do in our religious institutions? In short, is there something that we can do in some way which promotes that humanizing process? So I'd like to take it on those two stages. Some of you may know, and Sam spearheaded and was the energizing force and continues to be. I alternate in terms of how I assess it and describe it. When I'm feeling good, I call it he's inspired and energized. At other times, when I'm looking at him, I say he's obsessed and I wish he'd put up for another form of life because I can't take it any longer. So it depends on how you look at it, but he clearly has an energy which I think is very characteristic of many people. John certainly has it too. For better or for worse, they are the energizers for this kind of activity, and Sam certainly has been my energizer or my whipper. And you can choose your words accordingly. In the 80s, and we interviewed over 400 rescuers, not personally, of course. We organized a group. Primarily rescuers from Poland, Germany, France, and Holland. Because we also wanted to make sure that this was a study which had some scientific basis, we also interviewed a comparison group of non-rescuers, which is approximately 150 of them, and these are the far-flung seas, some also in the United States, and some of them are, at least one of them is sitting in this room. And we also have in our files about 150 survivor accounts. Our interview schedule, you see, science says to us, okay, if you just study one group of rescuers, or if you just study rescuers, well, you can find out what they have in common. The question is, and that scientists are left with after that is, well, the fact that they have that in common, does that distinguish them from rescuers? I mean, if I studied all rescuers and I said, okay, all of them have eyes, well, how is that different from non-rescuers? And our effort was to try to see what made rescuers different. How could we describe what their differences were? And so we did this sample of 150 non-rescuers, and we had this interview schedule, which was both what we call semi-structured and some structured and some open aspects. So we had some way of assessing quantitatively as well as qualitatively what we were hearing. And this whole project took many years because we not only had to have all these people interviewed, they had to be found, all the stuff had to be then transcribed and translated, then put on a computer. It was an obsessive activity for many, many years, and we wanted to do a good job because we felt this had to have some credibility and some longevity in order to have some message. So what I would like to do first is just distribute this sheet with you, to you, and then let's go over some numbers. There are some of you who may feel more comfortable with numbers than others, but I'm going to try to be a little clearer about this. Some of you may be far superior to us with these numbers, but in which case I hope you will be kind.
Kind, and the other word is patient.
Kind of patient.
Kind and patient.
Kind of patient.
For a few minutes until you understand the numbers.
Yes, I have more. Oh, wait, yes. I even have more.
Sure.
Oh, I gave you one of the sheets I wanted that time. The one with the numbers on it.
She gave us the key.
Maybe this one, is that pencil marks now? And that's five, this one?
We're generous, altruistic people. Yes, this one.
Mine is
I
upside
trade you.
down.
Hashem as the basic source for generating our names. And these were people whom Yad Vashem had dossiers on and had files on and documentation. The documentation and the petition to get into Yad Vashem's acknowledgement of rescuer is based on testimony. Now, not every, about 5% of our rescuers were people that Sam identified and, in fact, in some cases was subsequently responsible for helping get the process going with Yad Vashem.
Such as Otto Springer, you recognize him, you take a pride in doing it.
Right, so we did take that liberty, but 95% were Yad Vashem. A rescuer was anyone who was not on Yad Vashem's list, as simple as that. We had our cohorts, our colleagues in these respective countries who were university-affiliated academicians help identify a non-rescuer sample. So anyone who is not an authenticated Yad Vashem rescuer, not that we doubted that some of them might have been, but it was just they were not authenticated. Now, an interesting thing happened as we did our study because, and we should have anticipated it, but it worked out just fine. As we worked with our non-rescuer sample, when we were halfway through the interview, we asked them, was there anything that you did during the war? And of that group, 50 said they had done something in the war. And some claimed to have either helped Jews, some to have been in resistance activities, and some both. Now, we didn't doubt what they said, but we just had no verification. And we weren't interested in, as far as rescue is concerned, that did not involve just general resistance. They really had to be authenticated helpers of Jews. We kept that group. We called them non-rescuers, but we called them active non-rescuers. Then we had a group of 70 people who, by their own description of their activity, said, I did nothing special to help anybody during the war. And we call those people passives. Okay. So those were actually the three categories. Now, in certain statistical cases, we combine both the actives, passives together. We also have some further analysis of rescuers and passives and rescuers and actives. We did not include all that in the book. We are doing some further analysis, and I'll tell you about that later and some other ways, because we've also gotten some additional data in. Now, I need to also make a disclaimer at this point. This in no way is what we would call a representative sample. It's impossible. Statisticians usually insist on that, and for good reasons. If you want to generalize to a population, we are not claiming here that we can, with any degree of accuracy, generalize to what the world of rescuers was or what the world of non-rescuers was, because we do not have a random sample. We think, however, we have, at this point, probably among more systematic attempts to get at that. That's all we can say, and that we have, and it's quite possible we have a representative sample, even though it does not meet the statistician's strict requirements. I mean, we have to deal with what's possible. And of course, nobody has an exhaustive list of all rescuers. Nobody knows who they are. Yad Vashem probably has identified about 10,000 by now. A slow process. How many have died will never be known. How many haven't come forward. How many survivors. I mean, those are unknowns, and I can't see that we will ever really know the numbers. But, so these are just estimates. And but for us, their significance is not in their numbers, but in their minutes. And for us, the significance is not a quantitative one, but just the fact that they existed, and that should not be lost. It cannot be lost. Any other questions or clarification at this point before I go on to this? Okay. Now, what you see on this page is a consequence called a factor analysis. I won't explain terribly much about that, except to say that for each one of these vertical columns is a set of characteristics that statistically appear to go together frequently. Now, I'll interpret that in just a moment. Strictly, they're not types, they are factors. I will probably talk as though they are types, but for those of you who might be more statistically inclined, strictly they're not types. And if you see on the columns on the top, the titles of those columns, there are 4. Strong family attachments, Jewish friends, broad social commitment, and egalitarians. These are titles that we made up for certain factors which appear to capture what that whole factor was about, or the strongest variable in that column. So this is what the computer churned out, and we churned out the title on the top. This table, by the way, is found in the back of our book. It's probably the part that most people skip. So I chose to start with that. On the left are smaller factors or single items that went into the computer, and each one of those, in our book at least, is itemized as what questions they include. And I won't give you all the questions, but just to, for example, on the religiosity question, which is number 23 down, okay? That religiosity variable included about 5 questions. Among them was, how religious was your mother? How religious was your father? How religious were you before the war? How religious were you during the war? And how religious were you after the war? Okay, so several of these contain multiple questions. And our book highlights what each of those individual items are with respect to these variables on the left. Now let's go out. Now these are the whole sample of rescuers and non-rescuers combined, and then I'll tell you how we're different from non-rescuers in our study. Now look at that column marked strong family attachments. If you look at number 9, family closeness, that comes out to 0.66. I'm just reading the first two numbers of that fraction. Now that's the highest percentage, that column, or what we call the highest loading factor, the highest loading variable. And from that, we come to the title of that particular column, strong family attachments. Now I'm going to read out to you what the characteristics, and you can follow them in your particular column. What things went into that factor? Family closeness was at the top. Number 16, let's talked about Jews, was second on that with a 0.45. They're involved with helping other people today is 0.34, that was next. 21, personal potency, a feeling that they could control or have effect in their environment, was 0.34 also, that was number 5. Religiosity was number 23 with a 0.33. And a sense of social responsibility was 0.25 with 0.30. Number 25. Now you cut it off arbitrary, but that's what many statisticians advise us. You cut this off at 0.30. Anything below that doesn't mean terribly much. It doesn't suggest terribly much. So what kind of, if we were talking about a type, what kind of person are we talking about there? We're talking about a person who starts with a very good, solid family background, okay, with a good sense of, my family's a good place, a capacity to make good friends, close friends, a recognition in the family that somehow Jews are somehow salient to that family, not invisible. Okay, that was number 16. A person who's inclined to be helping in maybe only his own or her own community, but still, and number 3, inclined to be helpful. A sense of, I can do something. Personal potency. A sense of social responsibility, and religiosity is also there too. So if this, it seems to us, if we had a type here, it would characterize a community in which first, family closeness, but somehow also supported by a interlocking network of friends to include a religious community, which somehow all help to give this individual a sense of strength and that he or she could affect his or her environment, and a generally good, solid kind of individual, the kind we sort of associate with small town, good values, and strong upbringing. Someone had a question.
I think I got confused. The list on the side are different categories, and there were many questions under the categories, close friends, etc. Then the 4 on the top that go
Are the large factors. These are small factors, and then these were all fed into these large, and produced these large factors.
So, then the assumption is that if they came out high, or the ones that came out high were the ones that supported strong family attachments? I guess it's the end part I'm not
Yeah, it's a
understanding.
little confusing. What it means is that these things tended to go together. The variables that I'm naming tended to go together strongly. So people who had strong family, close ties also tended to be the same people where the parents talked about Jews, number 16 on the left, who also tended to have close friends. In short, there are certain things that went together. Now, I haven't told you yet how rescuers scored in relation to non-rescuers in relation to that.
This is the mixed one.
This is all mixed. Okay, I haven't told you yet how rescuers were different. I'm just telling you, am I going too slowly? I have to hurry up. I've gotten the signal. Yes, you had a question too? Maybe I shouldn't spend quite so much time on this and move on. Okay. I won't go through each of the items. You'll just have to, and I'll just summarize it. Okay, the second column was Jewish friends. This group, I'll just tell you, the highest loading on that was number 13, Jewish friends. This was a group who not only had close Jewish friends, but if you look at number 12, they worked among Jews. 6, they were empathic toward Jews, and they lived with Jews in their neighborhood. A group that just lived very normally among Jews and had strong feelings for them, apparently by their empathy. The next group was broad social commitments, and the highest one there was Jews at school, but that didn't seem to be terribly important. They were people who had a variety of friendships. They were also special toward Jews. Jews were sort of at the periphery of their environment. Their friendships were primarily with people who were what they called a variety of friendships would be Catholics with Protestants more often than or Protestants with Catholics, but not really Jews. Jews were just there at the periphery. The fourth were the people we call the egalitarians. These were people who were I do want to point something out on the broad social one. Number 5 is called detachment. And if you notice, that came out number 3, and that's where we read that they were very involved in their community. It comes out to a minus 0.50, which means they rejected detachment. People with a very strong sense of social responsibility. They believed in being involved, but you had to be involved. The last column, which we called egalitarians, is another kind of picture that emerges. And the highest loading on that one is number 8 with a ethnocentrism minus. Okay, these are people who rejected ethnocentrism strongly. These were people who had strong feelings of empathy, emotional empathy just generally to people who suffered and who were in pain. These were people who kept stressing, I'm like other people, I feel similar to outsiders, and no matter what their levels were. And these were not people who were necessarily activists. They come out with a negative on defended country before the war. These were people who were just felt very strongly about people's other suffering. Now, I want to tell you now, I mean, we could have a lot of interesting speculations here, but I want to tell you the point for us. With respect to each one of these factors, rescuers scored significantly higher than non-rescuers. That's one part. Equally important for us, and that sort of led to our next work. You see, the way we saw this was the first 2 columns, strong family attachments, Jewish friends, that's a relationship you develop out of the context of the people you live with. Okay, so I can feel for people who are close in my environment because they are near to me. They are within my vision. The last sort of a generalized feeling, something much more abstract, a broad social responsibility to the community at large, or just because people are in pain. You know, that's kind of an abstract principle. What we found was that rescuers, in significantly larger percentages than non-rescuers, had both one of these particularistics and one of these more generalized. What that said to us was several things. But the most important one was, if you are within your group alone, no matter how healthy and wonderful, but you don't have a way of getting out of that group, you just stay stuck in it. But if you wanted to be a rescuer, you had to have both a rooting in your own group somewhere, either with Jewish friends somewhere, or inside your family, but you also had to have some sort of abstract principle, whether it be responding to other people's suffering or a sense of responsibility, to get you moving in that other direction as well. So in short, we interpreted that as meaning it's not just enough to be rooted in your own group. You have to have a mechanism to think beyond your own group or beyond your own modes in your physical world. Now I'm going to pause here because now I want to do with that principle in some work we are just in the process of finishing. Are there any questions in relation to that? That was already a lot. Okay, so what we did was take that principle, the notion that it wasn't, that you had to be rooted both in something immediate as well as something outside that's more general and abstract, and we said, okay, using that as a principle, let's see, what do we know, and what do we know about how do you get there? And and the second question is, how do we take what we know and communicate it? And we said, okay, what can I do in my personal life? What can you do in your school? What can you do in your religious institution? What can you do in your family? What can you do in your business if you were going to go about creating a more caring society? And for this, and how can we communicate it simply? So we came up with what we call 8 processes. It's all there in literature. There's nothing particularly related except we try to be synthesizing and simple and pull from a wide variety of sources. Now the first 4 processes, we call those processes to help you get attached to your immediate community. The second 4 processes is how do you get attached to, and feel responsible towards people in front of you. And our view of it is you've got to have that those 8 processes are important in any endeavor in which you're engaged. Now, we certainly don't claim these as exhaustive, my friends. It's just a beginning, and it's a way of getting a lens to looking at what am I doing, what's my institution doing, what's happening at the place that I work. It's a way of sort of getting a lens through which you can filter through some experiences. Now, the first 4 processes that we say for getting to a caring context and making attachments to people with your group or with whom you're interacting routinely, the first one we call bonding. Okay, you have to have a means for bonding with others. You have to have a means for learning how to become empathic. The third one, you have to be able to learn some caring norms or rules. And the fourth is you have to have opportunities for practicing care. That's what we call those are our umbrella processes. For diversifying or including others, we have 4 others. This one we call diversifying. The second one we call networking. John today mentioned one, resolving conflicts. And the fourth one we call making the global linkage. Now, let me tell you briefly, we could take any institution that we wanted to. I mean, we could look at an educational institution, we could look at an occupational one. Let me apply it at Sam, and you're going on too long. How much longer have I got? Well, I think questions are probably one of the most important. Well, not if we include questions, then you want me to finish before 3, right?
Three next question. We'll hold you to 3, no matter what.
Okay, I should read you though. Am I going on too long already, my friends? Okay, but barely. All right, I'll try to rush it a bit. Okay, let me tell you about what we call bonding. Most of you know what bonding means, and I'll highlight a few words. It means attending to people's needs, physical, emotional, providing a stimulating environment, providing security, providing play opportunities, providing comfort opportunities, plus providing the opportunities for autonomy. Now, we could take this on any institution. These are the same factors that will work to making a business community bond or an educational institution bond, a profession bond, or any others. And Jack is nodding his head because he recognizes them as being very much talked about. Exactly, exactly. You could take this to a classroom, you could take it to a school, and everyone has to bond. Now, the trouble is, it's not just, that's where we look at schools, you know, the kids have to bond, but we have to bond with each other as teachers, and, you know, I mean, you have to, everyone has to bond. The second is empathizing, and this includes, among other things, learning to know yourself, okay, acknowledging what you are, and that requires some courage to explore, opportunities to explore what you are in a safe place, learning to understand each other, perhaps even learning to feel what others feel. And we know that there are ways that this can be stimulated. And we have research which tells us if you can't really do these things, you wind up in some way somewhat morally impaired, or at least there's some evidence to suggest that. The third one is learning caring norms. Okay, you have to communicate, and people have to see that the rules really around this place is that we have to care for each other. And those rules have to be expressed in varying forms. One of the ways is to use caring language. Now, I must tell you that one of the hardest words that I've had to use is love. It took me a long time to be able to use that without sort of squirming. I've learned how to use that more. So, and I've begun to feel comfortable. But using caring language, beginning to penetrate many more circles, my friends, and it's being used by all kinds of people who years ago would have been equally embarrassed with me. You have to be able to observe, you need the opportunity to observe caring models. You need to have some explicit rules. You know, we don't hurt people around. Not only don't we not hurt, we help people around here. You need to reinforce others' caring behavior. I mean, if you see somebody doing something really nice, you say, gee, that was a good thing to do, and why was it good? This is equally important, not to make it arbitrary, because that makes somebody else feel better. So it's not just a matter of saying, or God, I'm telling you that you've done well, but the reason it's good, you provide a reason, is its impact on other people. So people learn to value that rule. You know, it's good to make other people feeling. And you also, it's an important thing, and some people have captured that very well. Francis Moore-Pay does a beautiful job of this. When you do something good to make other people feel better, there are some people who might feel it's my duty, but if you can feel the joy of it, it's going to come through. And it's going to be a much more powerful way of communicating that rule to express the joy. The fourth part of that is practicing care. You need opportunities to actually practice care. You have to make sure that people in the institution have that opportunity. And that's in your families, in your schools, in your businesses, and so on. How? First, you have to communicate to them that you have expectations of them that they, and empower them to take care of themselves as well as others according to their abilities. And that's that if they are very young, you say, yes, set the table, okay? You don't do for others what they can do for themselves. And there are studies which show that. There are studies which show, for example, that very young kids who have had that experience of having to get up and set the table, or have had been somehow cajoled, coerced, directed by their parents to greet people at the door, will do so spontaneously later on in teen, even when their parents are not around. They just sort of spontaneously get up and help. They don't have to think about it anymore because they're used to doing it. Practicing care provides you with the routines. When you share your information with others, okay, encouraging people to share information rather than hoard it. What are your little treasures for doing things successfully? Are you willing to share what you know? You know, some people, that's a way of getting ahead is to hoard your information and your sources. So sharing information becomes a way of practicing care. So encouraging people to share their information. And then there are obvious ones, you know, visiting the ill, take on some public project. There's a lot of stuff, and we have a lot of stuff in our book, and we show that it occurs in many contexts, including the business context, in ways that many people don't recognize. The object in practicing care is to routinize it, to make it habitual. So it isn't just a matter of, oh, I'm going to think, should I be caring in this situation? It becomes a way of behaving. It becomes a thoughtless way of behaving, which is important just as much as thinking. Now let's get to the diversifying. The diversifying, that means stretching out. You have to make what we call diversifying, is making a deliberate effort to know other people for just knowing them, no other reason than just, okay, if this is a university group, gotta make an effort to know people in the community. If I am young, make an effort to meet more.
Hopefully, we will have an opportunity to speak or meet again. In the interim, living the 3 C's will be part of our daily classroom behavior. Thank you for all you gave to us. The 3 C's is care, compassion, and consideration. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for that good discussion on altruism and the 3 C's. The last panel of the day, which will be composed of most of the first panel, and add a couple more people to talk, just each person will get a little time to talk about any other solutions they haven't had a chance to slip in during the day. And while those people are coming, Eric, would you like to talk a little bit about your project? Eric is a student here of Dr. Steiner's, and he has he's a computer and gameist, and he's in the process of developing a project for us on behalf. In your packet, there is a full-page explanation which he has written of the potential for his idea as a teaching tool.
Actually, what we're proposing to work on isn't essentially a computer game. It's what's known as a role-playing game. And what that is when you, the players take characters of different people. It's basically a simulation of real life. And for a Holocaust series, you could do a simulation of a Holocaust type environment, where you could make some of the class be prison guards, some be rescuers, some be citizens, some be inmates. And then kind of force them to deal with the situation themselves, so they become more emotionally involved in that. But one that project that Dr. Steiner and I are currently working on is we're going to do kind of an object lesson where, so we set as kind of a simulation documentary concerning the Holocaust, and there'll be like a discussion of it, and then they'll lead the students into the scenario for the actual game, and then I guess after that, the teacher will, or the scenario, then they'll partake in it, and then hopefully run their various roles and experience what it's like to be in that situation. And the idea is basically not to recreate the actual Holocaust, but to understand what happened. So they'll, come to a realize why it shouldn't happen again, and therefore they'll take more interest in it.
Any questions?
Yeah, any questions?
Is it available?
We're starting it like about now, so it's not made yet.
Can I buy it up there?
You just have to be in touch with
Keep in contact, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, can we have the same faculty back so that we can do the last panel, please?
What may have contributed towards this sort of turnout, this low turnout?
Dr. Steiner, I want to say something about, especially about some German-born people. I have several German-born people, my friends in this area that are at SSU, and they say they just can't come to the Holocaust. They just don't want to face it.
Painful, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
Especially if there's blame analysis.
Yeah.
By implication, blame, obviously, but no intention.
I had a very interesting experience in Germany when I spoke before a university history student group in Hanover,
In
Germany.
Hanover.
Hanover, Germany. And I knew that it won't be an easy task, but to see their faces, their painful faces as I unfolded my story to them, in German, by the way. I had my story translated so that I could deliver it in their own language. I wanted them to know that I made this very special effort so that they will know what happened during the Holocaust to one individual. And this was the first time, turned out, that we've ever heard, met, or have seen a survivor other than the movies. There was such quiet in this large room, about this size, if not larger, that I wondered what was wrong. Finally, one person got up and spoke to the entire group, and I truly felt their pain. And the message that I was given was that we are the children and the grandchildren of perpetrators, and you are the one who suffered as a result. And we are totally shocked by what we heard. So please excuse our silence, and we're grateful that you have come. I moved closer just to create some sort of bond, as you called it earlier, and it helped somewhat to open up this the wall, right? It was just a little crack, but it opened up, and I was able to ask them what they've learned in school, and it was totally optional as to what they wished to learn, and most of their learning of the Holocaust came through the books that they read voluntarily or through the media, and that is it. And I said, well, haven't any of you spoken to your parents or your grandparents? This is a very good opportunity to get first-hand information for you from your own parents, so you will learn it from them directly. And so people, several students, and there were some professors among them and other teachers, came in, said that they've tried, and nobody would communicate with them, and all of them were told that you know nothing about it.
To round out that story, the University of Hanover was on strike at the time. The university was closed down. The students were on strike because they objected to efforts to increase the tuition fee. The students were around. They were demonstrating every day over the whole city. But nothing was going on at the university. But signs went up all over that a survivor of the Holocaust is going to speak. And scrawled on one
I really went with an open heart and ready to talk to them as I speak to other students. It didn't turn out quite the same way. However, at no time did I feel toward them that they are the children or the grandchildren of my persecutors. Somehow, to me, they were students, and that I knew of them were alive at the time when the Holocaust happened, and I could not possibly hold against them that which happened to me and my people. I just couldn't. And I let them know this. By the way, we were doing some filming that day, and it is a very powerful piece of film that will be part of the documentary film that we're making.
Good question.
Yes, that's what was that part of that group? You did this as part of this group, and I presume Carl, you're part of it too, that group of survivors was established. Okay, now the two of you may be part of that group of survivors who's established linkages with the children of perpetrators, is that part of that group? I think that would be such a wonderful group.
I'm not sure whether about the same
You're
thing.
talking about children, child survivors.
You're talking about reconciliation.
The reconciliation.
Oh, no.
No, it's not called the reconciliation. It was called, there's a group that, survivors making contact with, perpetrators' children.
I remember seeing an article in the paper about
Well,
that.
which group are you in?
But we were not a part of any group. We were entirely on our own, received an invitation to speak in Hanover, and Hanover was one of the 7 camps that I was in. So at the
Who
same,
extended the invitation?
the University of Hanover.
I knew that established the contact.
Well, someone actually came to interview me before
From
there. And since I worked in a factory making gas masks in Hanover at Continental Gummiwerke, I decided to somehow get a factory. I wanted to see that factory very badly. And in talking to the film crew, I said, how am I going to do this? I guess I'm just going to knock on the door and say, I used to work here a long time ago. I'd like to see what the place looks like. They just laughed, but I really meant this. However, I didn't have to do that. It so happened that I also had to dedicate a monument to the Holocaust, to the victims of the Holocaust. And in my little speech, I included the fact that the Continental Gummiwerke does not acknowledge the fact to date that there were Holocaust laborers working for them, but I am one who was a slave laborer in their factory making gas masks, and that I would like to visit that factory before I leave, whether I'm invited or not. And right after this assembly, 5 people came up to me and said they represent the board of directors of the Continental Univerga, and they respectfully invite me on a tour of the factory, and that is how I got it.
Did you bring the mask?
Oh yes, I have 2 masks as a proof that they're still making it. I asked them what for. The war's been over for 40-some years, and they said, well, for industrial purposes, of course.
I have a question to ask related to this very topic. And that is actually maybe all of you here. That is that it reminded me of a story before I get to the question. In Alaska, a minister, I think it was a Presbyterian minister, came over to the Indians were having a powwow, Native Americans. And he came to this large gathering of people, and no he didn't, but the white people are decimated. There were 9 million Native Americans in 1492, and in 1850 there was 225,000. And they sure didn't take off to the skies, you know. They didn't bury themselves by themselves. So this apology was extremely moving to the Alaskan Indian population. So much so that there were tears and all kinds of things happening. My question specifically is that, and that's a question which is really informational, I don't know the answer. What has been my feeling in the German leadership, President Weizsäcker and others, even previous Chancellor, what's his name?
Are you talking about Weizsäcker?
Weizsäcker. Also talking about Prime Minister or Chancellor before Kohl was Schmidt. All these Schmidt. All these gentlemen supposedly apologized on behalf of the German people. And I felt that this was a beautiful move, not that it brings back the victims, but it was a beautiful move in terms of healing. You see, in a sense, it would be beautiful if the American government were to apologize to the Native Americans. If the Turkish people would apologize to the 1.5 million Armenians that they slaughtered in 1915. So, question. Aren't they teaching about the Holocaust now in Germany?
Yes.
Question.
Oh, yes, they are.
Question.
I know.
Perhaps things have changed. What varies from state to state, please?
Yeah, well, the German educational system is a little bit like the American system in that there is no standardized curriculum nationwide. It is up to the individual states. And so exactly what happens in each individual state, I can't tell you. However, there is a lot of national coordination of curriculum. And the one powerful organization that I want to point out in this context is this institute called the Zentrale für politische Bildung, the Federal Center for Political Education, which apparently has a very large budget because it sends educational materials, pamphlets, and books of all sorts to, I think, every school that requests them.
Federal agency?
It's a federal agency, or maybe even sends them automatically to schools. I'm not sure exactly what. Not automatically, but anyhow, it is this large library of informational material and sort of conscience-pricking material too, which will be disseminated all around Germany. I've seen it in schools, lots of different places, and I visited the place itself in Bonn when I was there in 1983, and got an eyeful of the materials at their disposal, which they are very free in distributing. Now, unless I'm mistaken, Heidi, maybe you know more about this. I believe that in every state, every land in Germany, there is now a requirement that the Holocaust be specifically studied in some way, shape, or form in years. My son was in the 10th grade in the Gesamtschule, the comprehensive school in Göttingen, and then again the 12th and 13th grade in a gymnasium in Göttingen. And I asked him, what did you get in any of that period about the Holocaust? And he said, well, you see, I missed the year where the Holocaust was a big part of the curriculum, so I can't tell you exactly how it looked at that point, or the 11th grade, rather his 12th grade, 12 or whatever. He was back in the United States. He missed the segment that they taught the Holocaust in. Nonetheless, he said that at his gymnasium, there were student groups discussing it frequently, from discussing this aspect or that aspect, often on the students' initiative, often on the faculty's initiative. It was obviously a topic that was taken very seriously. Now, this is the one side of it that one can see if you open your eyes. The other side of it is the denial side, which is certainly real. And you get a lot of people saying, give me a break. How many times do I have to go on my knees like Billy Dunn did before the Warsaw Ghetto until the world accepts me as a human being? I didn't do these things. I'm very sorry that my ancestors did, and I want to get on with my life. And so you get this kind of frustration and sort of tiredness with the Holocaust that a lot of people express. In a sense, I can understand it. I like to, my attitude about that is, well, sometimes the right to expect to be treated just like any other people in the world after the Holocaust. I, meanwhile, would like to turn that page over and suggest that no people in the world whose ancestors have ever been responsible for anything like that have the right to silence, have the right to expect that other people will think they never did anything wrong. I'm speaking specifically of my ancestors. I don't even know what they did to the Indians, what you know about how the Indians disappeared and the state of degradation that they've been reduced to.
Just in addition to that, in 1991, Facing History took a group of teacher trainers throughout Eastern Europe, including what was newly unified East Germany, West Germany. And we met with high school teachers and scholars and students in many places, especially in East Berlin. It was still in East Berlin, well, it was Eastern Berlin. And there were several things that came out of that. One was that there's a dichotomy, as he talks about, or there are two sides to it. There are two sides to the same coin. One side of it is that they're doing something. The something that they're doing may not be any better than